So today I thought I'd like to put together a guide that will make it simple and clear for anyone to understand the ancient Celtic belief system and religion. This guide will be based on what we know from a historical perspective, and so we'll be avoiding any of those concepts that are taught by New Age neo-paganist movements, and we will focus on what we know from the history and the archaeology. And we'll start with the very basics. The Celts were polytheists, and a polytheist is one that venerates many gods, as opposed to a monotheist, which venerates just one god. So why many gods? Wasn't one god good enough for them? Well, they had a completely different mindset to the one that we have today. Their thoughts didn't revolve around one superpower that was in control of everything. In fact, what they believed is that divinity was in everything, and so their gods were more personifications of a divine force. These personifications, the gods and goddesses, tended to reflect various elements within nature and also aspects of Celtic culture that the Celts deemed to be important. And so we'd have a sun god, and a god of the woodlands and the wild, and a god of the underworld. We'd also have a god of farming and agriculture, and a god of the arts and crafts. So in short, there was a god that resided over everything that was important within Celtic culture. So who were these gods and goddesses? And well, we know the names of over 200 gods and goddesses through inscriptions and through the narratives of the Romans and Greeks of the time. But just to get an idea, I'll put a little list of them up on the screen for you to see. But what's more important than knowing the name of every god and goddess is to understand Celtic culture and understand what they actually believed in. Now, the Celts were a tribal people, and not every tribe had exactly the same gods. Or I think it's fair to say that the names of these gods may have differed between tribes. They certainly shared a common set of beliefs and ideologies, and many of the gods too were common amongst all of the tribes, and these gods we know as the pan-Celtic gods. But then there were tribal gods, the likes of which we're told about in Lucan's Pharsalia, where he mentions the tribal gods of Teutates, Isis and Tyrannus. And as we understand it, although each tribe had their own set of gods, the structure amongst the tribes was still very similar. There was the protector and warrior god of the tribe, the mother goddess of fertility, the earth and the land, the sky god that brought fair weather and the rains to cultivate their crops. Then there was the god of more subtle things, the spiritual god, the god of divination and magic. So this structure we believe to have been common amongst the Celtic tribes, but with subtle differences. The protectorate god may be known by one name by one tribe and by a completely different name by another. But the roles and the responsibilities of that god remain the same. Let's talk about some of the pan-Celtic gods now. And here I have a list of some of the better known and perhaps the most important pan-Celtic gods. I won't go through each and every one, otherwise this entire discussion's going to be just about the gods of the Celts. And there's a lot more to understand about their belief system than just the gods and goddesses. As I mentioned before, they believed that divine power was in everything. So to them, everything contained or was made up of elements of divinity, and so it makes sense that everything had a spirit. The forest, the rivers, the lakes, the seas, the mountains, they all contained a spirit. And they venerated these local spirits. And there are remnants and references to shrines they set up in these sacred spaces in veneration to the spirit that they believed resided there. Now, if you think about it, this really isn't as far-fetched as you would first believe. We all know that rivers, woods and forests and mountains, well, they all have a certain character. At a certain time of the year, a river could be wild and foreboding, and at another time of the year, it could be calm and peaceful. And so it was this character of the river that they personified as the spirit that actually resided there. Now that makes complete sense to me if you look at it from that perspective. Now this concept of believing that everything had a spirit is known as animism. And if you want to find out more about animism, I'll post a link to a video up here. So they were polytheists and animists, and it's widely believed now that their priesthood was also shamanic. And if we look at the definition of shamanism, we'll find that a shaman is one who interacts with the spirit world through altered states of consciousness. And of course, when I'm talking about the Celtic priesthood, I'm talking about the Druids. Now, much in recent times has been said about the Druids, but in reality, we have no real physical evidence about their practices. What's most widely believed today, and this is extrapolated from the various narratives of the Roman era, is that the Druids went through a long period of training, some say up to 20 years. According to Caesar, and I quote, "Many young men were trained to be Druids, during which time they had to learn all the associated lore by heart. He also said that their main teaching was that souls do not perish, but after death pass from one to another. They were concerned with the stars and their movements, the size of the cosmos on the earth, the world of nature, and the power and might of the immortal gods." And as I said earlier on, it's widely believed that within historical circles that this communion with the immortal gods and the spirit world was through a shamanic practice. So what have we established so far? Well, we know that the Celts were polytheists, we know that they were animists, and we believe that their connection to the spirit world was shamanic in practice. Now, I've mentioned this other world or spirit world a few times. So what's that all about? Well, we'll go there now in a minute, but first I want to talk about triplicity in the Celtic world and the sacred number 3. And it's important that I talk about triplicity first before I start speaking about the other worlds, and when we get there, you'll understand why. The Celts believed that everything in nature revolved around the number 3. There was life, death, and rebirth. They could plainly see this in the vegetation cycle, where things would begin to grow and they would thrive and eventually die, just for the whole cycle to begin again the following year. Then when they looked around and into the heavens, they could see the sun, the moon, and the earth. Then there was the sky, the land, and the sea. And then we see many depictions of the Celtic gods in Triplicity, such as the three mothers, and also the three faces and multiple inscriptions to the god Lugus. And so with all this triplicity permeating Celtic culture, of course there were three worlds: the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world. And the upper world and the lower world were known collectively as the otherworlds. The upper world was the world of the sky and the world of inspiration and enlightenment. The lower world was the world where the ancestors rested, and so was the world of wisdom and knowledge. And so it was these two worlds, the upper world and the underworld, that the Celtic shamans travelled between in order to commune with the gods and seek spiritual guidance. And that's about as much as we know with any real degree of certainty about the Celtic belief system. Their entire belief system revolved around nature and the personifications of nature as their gods and goddesses. And the natural cycle of life, death, and rebirth told them of their existence and what they could expect when they died, to rest in the underworld before being reborn, to start again. So I hope you've all enjoyed today's discussion, and if you have, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And with that, I'll see you again very soon on the next one.